stop far-right extremists in the United States, besides not electing them to office or launching Ted Cruz into space? Anyone?
Boo! You stink!
Now that we know the threat to American safety isn't Muslims, but those who are probably screaming about Muslims on Facebook, many are calling for a renewed so-called war on terror, which is rude because we haven't finished our last one yet, okay? Way to be greedy.
Which one are you talking about here? Black Lives Matter riots or the Antifa riots? I kind of lost track on who did it more. Or even did it first.
I'm Francesca Fiorentini.
It's Anna Kasparian, in color!
And now that we know that the call is coming from inside the House of Representatives, we're looking at how America can finally learn from its past mistakes and get smarter about rooting out extremist violence.
Nope.
White racist violence has existed since America's founding. It's pretty much the story of it.
And child sex trade/trafficking still exists in the Middle East. There are still tribes in Africa that still perform witchcraft or other tribal sacrifices.
And after years of terrorizing black and indigenous people, immigrants, women, synagogue and mosque worshippers, and the American flag,
Wow! The land of make-believe!
On January 6th, it stormed the halls of power. But of course, like any ghoul, it cannot enter without first being invited.
Hold on. There we go. Continue.
And it's been clear for years that unlike what the right would have you believe, it's white radicalization that's the greatest danger in this country.
The biggest terrorist threat here in the U.S., here in the homeland, is what we would call sort of homegrown violent extremists.
I just love describing them as homegrown. What did we start, a white nationalist microbrewery in our garage? You can really taste the hops.
Let's go ahead and watch this clip in its entirety, to give you a thing called context.
What is the biggest threat you see? For a long time, it was radical Islamic terrorism. What's the biggest threat that you see as FBI director?
The biggest terrorist threat here in the U.S., here in the homeland, is what we would call sort of homegrown violent extremists. And these are people who are lone actors typically, motivated by a variety of different ideologies, some jihadists, some others, who go very quickly from radicalization to attack, typically radicalized online, and they're going after soft targets, schools, shopping malls, easy to hit targets and using easily accessible weapons. And those kinds of terrorists are much harder to detect and prevent in many ways. And so that's what we think of as the greatest threat to here in the homeland.
Now, where in that little statement did he say that it was all Whitey's fault? Don't you just love how she tried to bash us Whiteys when in that clip I just showed you, he said nothing Whitey related at all? I'm assuming that when she mentions the white radicals, she probably thinks, the neo-Nazis, the KKK, the Proud Boys, or just conservatives. So let me ask you something, Franny. 7% of the country was up in flames from the various riots. And we're talking like billions of dollars in damages all around the country. Who did all that? Was it the neo-Nazis? No. The KKK? No. Proud Boys? Of course not. So far, I believe it's Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Because of all the footage we can find on Twitter or other websites that, show raw footage of these riots, it's very clear. I mean, how could you be so fucking blind?
And yet, fittingly, Trump ignored threats and defunded the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to stop homegrown extremism, instead diverting the same funds to stopping homegrown marijuana. Which makes sense, because if there's one person that's never been high, it's William Barr. What would that even look like? Have you ever synced Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon to Birth of a Nation? It's pretty sick.
I don't get it.
Did you forget that Trump has offered state governors, the National Guards or the military to come over and give them, extra help with all the riots that's happening in their cities? And most of them just said, fuck you, Trump, I want nothing to do with you. Get away from me. I got this. No? Okay.
Of course, it's not surprising Trump wouldn't want to root out violent white supremacists within his base. He might not have a base left if he did that.
And who might those be? I know I'll never get an answer. Just felt like asking it.
But it is surprising that the man who Trump launched his political career by attacking would also not take the threat seriously, especially when his very ascendancy as the first black man in the Oval Office fueled so much radicalization. Instead, in 2009, the Obama administration, under pressure from an increasingly reactionary Republican Party, dismantled the extremism and radicalization branch of DHS after it produced a report about the dangers of far-right anti-government activity. A former DHS worker, Daryl Johnson, explains what happened.
The department decided to not only stop all of our work, stop all of the training and briefings that we were scheduled to give, but they also disbanded the unit, reassigned us to other areas within the office, and then made life increasingly difficult for us.
Ah, the Obama years. Back when we naively thought that the best way to stop white nationalism was to just give them everything they wanted, like some sort of amateur lion tamer. Let me be clear. I let it nibble on my hand so it won't eat my whole body.
Daryl Johnson's report was just one big-ass assumption. It basically says that once a black guy gets into office, people on the right are going to freak out and they're going to be violent. But did that happen? Fuck no. I don't recall that ever happening.
The buck has been passed so much from administration to administration that January 6th was certainly not a surprise. It was also not a surprise that there was law enforcement among the rioters themselves. Of the 150 people arrested thus far, 14% are current or former military, which according to former FBI agent Michael German, checks out.
So of the 150 people, 21 of them were arrested. Now, when they were arrested when they got caught in the Capitol building, or were they near like the front line, like pushing the gate and all that crap? But where are they? You're being very vague here. Could you be more specific? Like, where did the arrests take place?
It has been a persistent problem that law enforcement, including the FBI and Department of Justice, have long acknowledged. And in fact, even in their 2015 counterterrorism policy guide, directed agents to alter their methodologies in cases, domestic terrorism cases against white supremacists and far-right militants, because they found that the subjects of these investigations often have links to law enforcement.
Wait, so you're telling me that some of those that work forces are in fact the same that burn crosses? Big if true.
Keyword, if. I think she's trying to say that those guys are KKK members. Fucking ridiculous.
Take the group The Oath Keepers, one of the many that took part in the Capitol riots. 2/3 of its members have a background in the military or law enforcement, and 10% are active duty. The very name Oath Keepers comes from the oath that members of the military take to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Yikes! Talk about being caught in a prison of your own making. I'm sure after January 6th, they're all home beating the shit out of themselves.
So of the however many members are in the Oath Keepers group, only a few of them did something stupid. That does not mean every single one of them is a fucking idiot. Just like how you're trying to say every single person who was at the Capitol protest march or whatever rally that day, every single one of them, which was in the hundreds of thousands, if not maybe a million, there were so many, they're all not idiots. If you were to take, say, like a large Hershey chocolate bar, and you know how it's shaped like a rectangle, and if you look vertically, there's like 2 pieces to every vertical length, and say there's, let's say 2, 4, 6, let's say there's 10 vertical lengths on that candy bar, and you snap off the first 2 of that piece. That 2 piece, those were the idiots that stormed the Capitol. The rest of the candy bar, they were innocent. They had nothing to do with the riot, and I'm pretty sure the last thing they would do was go into the riot. And they would just be like, what the hell are these people doing? I'm getting out of here while getting's good. I've already spoke up. I'm going home.
So what have U.S. security agencies been doing this entire time far-right extremism was gaining steam, even within some of their ranks?
Shock and anger pulsed through the crowd after discovering their mosque was targeted by the NYPD, recording their license plates, photographing worshippers.
The NYPD's assistant chief has admitted in court that none of its monitoring led to a single terrorism lead or investigation.
Obama said he will send an additional 30,000 troops to Afghanistan over the next 6 months.
At least 7 Americans have been killed by U.S. drone strikes, and the most famous example, radical cleric Anwar al-Awlaki. The fourth, Awlaki's 16-year-old son, killed just 2 weeks after his father.
Ahmed Mohammed brought the clock to his high school in Irving, Texas on Monday to try to impress his teacher. But instead of praise, the teacher was frightened that the clock might be a bomb.
Michelle Catalano had searched for pressure cookers. She was going to cook something up. And her husband has searched for backpacks. They got a knock on the door from 6 people in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And they got pulled in and they started asking them questions. Do you own a pressure cooker? My husband said no, but we have a rice cooker. Can you make a bomb with that? My husband said no. My wife uses it to make
quinoa.
Thank you. Quinoa. What the hell is quinoa, they asked?
Okay, but everyone knows what quinoa is, especially after that episode of 24. You've got 5 seconds to tell me what quinoa is. Where are the grains?
I don't get it.
Well, what the hell did you expect when someone uses an actual kitchen cooking product to use as a fucking weapon? Yeah, there are going to be some eyebrows raised and questions. This happens to almost anything. Anything that is used, whether it's an actual weapon or it's just a homemade product, someone's going to try to manipulate it or just mess with it and turn it into a weapon. It happens, and we question it. This is what we normally do. Idiots out there will take a simple product and make it into something more dangerous. Why do you think that when you go to a pharmacy and you need some Sudafed, they ask for your ID? Or why, when you go to a store to purchase a can of that dust cleaner spray, you gotta show ID before you buy it?
The U.S. counterterrorism strategy has been myopically focused on Al-Qaeda and ISIS and put Muslims and Muslim countries in the crosshairs, with 2 ground wars, drone strikes, killing of innocent civilians including Americans, torture, lawless imprisonment at Guantanamo, warrantless wiretapping, and the massive surveillance and demonization of the American Muslim community.
And you're not going to say this happened during the Obama years because you like Obama so much? Huh? Alright. You know, this reminds me of an event that happened in 1941 when the Japanese army airstriked a military base, Pearl Harbor, which of course led to us, entering World War II. And, we just sat back and said, alright, let's just pray for our troops and all that. We didn't do anything bad here to our Japanese civilians here in America. Oh wait, yeah we did. The internment camps that were started up by, you guessed it, Franklin Roosevelt, the president at the time, who was also a Democrat. Oh, interesting.
Not only has all that not worked, but the blowback has arguably been worse. Things like creating a breeding ground for groups like ISIS in Iraq. Plus, the FBI has relied on some incredibly questionable tactics like entrapment operations that actually create the crimes they're supposedly stopping. Just listen to author Trevor Aronson of Terror Factory explain how the FBI cultivated its own suspects.
Many of the men that are being prosecuted for committing an act of terrorism or conspiracy to commit an act of terrorism are like Muhammad. They aspired to commit some sort of act of terrorism. They said hateful and odious things, but on their own, they never had the capacity to commit an act of terrorism. It was the FBI informant or it was the FBI undercover agent who provided the bomb and all of the logistical means they needed to commit their crime.
Is he trying to say that the FBI is responsible for the terrorist attacks in the U.S. and they just use Arab people as their pawns?
I don't know if you can congratulate yourself on catching so-called terrorists that you devoted millions of dollars, man-hours, and undercover agents into convincing to do terrorism. It's like when a magician wants applause for putting the woman back together. You sawed her in half, buddy. You're not the hero.
Oh my god, I can't believe it. You're siding with a guy who wrote a book. A fucking book!
Meanwhile, they were missing tips on actual attacks.
And yet the people who are committing the real offenses, the real acts of terrorism, Tamerlan Zainayevs or Faisal Shahzad who delivered a bomb to Times Square that fortunately didn't go off, the really dangerous guys aren't being trapped in these sting operations, in part because in a way they're not dumb enough to go to the local mosque or into the community and talk to an informant about how they want to commit an act of terrorism.
The FBI has been narrowcasting to only the dumbest people. Not every extremist will be fooled into joining your Al-Qaeda Crimes Club Facebook group. That only works on white extremists.
Oh! God, you're such an asshole!
But even with 20 years of blowback, the loss of innocent lives, trampling of civil liberties, there are still those who believe that we should use the War on Terror framework to go after white extremist violence. Even just the language that's being used is telling.
We cannot allow these domestic terrorists and these enemy combatants to win.
And when people stand up against the evildoers, people always win.
And I'd say to the Democrats, it's time to roll out a terrorism era choice for Republicans, and this should come from every Democrat. You're either with them or with us.
Yeah, take down one side, but, give the others a break. Oh, it's not a riot. They're just stressed.
Enemy combatants, evildoers, with us or against us, all this is the same bogus language used during the War on Terror. We're just missing someone claiming that they're jealous of our freedoms and that their women need to be freed of their patriarchal role sewing Q flags.
But you're going after the right as if they are evildoers, you dumbass.
On a gut level, it is deeply satisfying to finally hear white extremism being treated in the same manner that far too many Black, brown, and Muslim Americans have been treated for decades.
If you're walking around town with a MAGA hat on, they got you in their crosshairs. People are being kicked off of planes because of a fucking hat. Now if you go on your social media account and just type in whatever you disagree with and why, and then try to make a post of trying to set an example to make a certain point, that job you have, say goodbye to it. You'll be fired. And what are you going to do about the other side? Like Black Lives Matter and Antifa and any other lefty idiot that is so brainwashed into thinking that the right is so bad they need to be extinguished. What are you going to do about them? Nothing? Just sit back and just watch the city burn down? Okie dokie. Have fun with that.
It's like affirmative action for the War on Terror. But if we actually want to win this war on white extremism, why use strategies that have failed? And worse yet, have led to more extremism. It's chilling to think about what the blowback might be, especially since white extremists are already using ISIS tactics like running cars into crowds.
Enough of this cars into crowds bullshit! First off, you did not protest on a goddamn street! And as for that putz over in Charlottesville, if other protesters had not beaten the crap out of his car, trying to smash the window open so they could open the door, pry that fucker out, and beat him to death, no one would be run over and that woman would still be alive! So up yours, Brown Anna, for even making that sick comparison!
Beyond the failure, the War on Terror and all of the propaganda around it is deeply racist and militaristic, and it's indoctrinated American society into an if you see something, say something psychology, effectively asking us all to be self-deputized G-men, sniffing out the sleeper cell in our midst.
Okay, so you're against trying to help bring down crime. Good to know. But I'm sure you're totally fine with contact tracing. Fucking idiot.
So it's no surprise that 20 years later, and enough Claire Danes ugly crying, we have white extremist militias, many of them former military, who see immigrants and Muslims as the enemy. What did we think was going to happen? Did we think that all the racists were just collecting guns to use in a big art installation that depicts people of the world holding hands, but all those people are made of guns? That's awesome, but racists hate art.
Boo! You stink!
So what should we be doing from a security standpoint? The Biden administration has hired a War on Terror veteran who seems serious about domestic threats, and the Senate is looking to pass a Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, which would create 3 new offices within DOJ, DHS, and the FBI. But too often, new terrorism laws risk further endangering communities that have always been in the crosshairs of the security state.
History shows that having anti-terrorism laws just affect people like myself. We don't need new laws to deal with white terrorists. The laws are there. It's whether you want to apply it to certain people or not.
Yeah, and that also happens to be experts' opinions as well.
Law enforcement has all the authority they need. Obviously, there's no type of violence that's legal. So they have all the authority they need. They just need to direct the Justice Department and the FBI to prioritize the investigation of white supremacist and far-right violence. This isn't hard because most of it has been in public over the last 4 years. So many of the people who were at the Capitol were actually committing violence in cities across the United States.
Yeah, you don't need new laws or elaborate schemes to make arrests. You pretty much just need a Facebook account and a weird uncle no one talks to anymore. Because if there's one thing these people love to do, it's telling on themselves.
I've had it up to here with you.
When it comes to white extremism and law enforcement itself, it turns out that doing what the Black Lives Matter movement has called for, which is basic tracking of officers' brutality and racial bias and enacting consequences for it, works.
Bullshit. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Not doing that ensures that white nationalists remain in law enforcement.
When there is an incident of alleged police brutality, the law enforcement, the FBI will often investigate that very narrowly, much the way they do hate crimes. Are we able to prove that there is some kind of bias or intention to violate civil rights in this case, rather than looking comprehensively at that police officer's past to know whether that bias could be proven by other means. And then those cases are sent to Justice Department prosecutors, and the vast majority of them are declined for prosecution.
The vast majority are declined for prosecution. Amazing how it's all connected, almost like it's some kind of system of racism. System racism. Systemic racism. Oh my God. There are also organizations that work with people who are either being swept into or trying to leave the white nationalist movement, like Life After Hate, which was receiving a grant from DHS, of course, until Trump assumed office.
Life After Hate has built a successful model that combines our unique experiences, professional training, and evidence-based practices. This in-person training empowers local professionals, law enforcement, mental health, and social services to recognize emerging threats within their community and to effectively engage with that person or group.
We only have a few minutes left on the original video. Is she ever going to mention about the NFAC? No, not fucking surprised.
Money for that kind of training should be reinstated twofold. I want my tax dollars going there and not to the war in Afghanistan. Can I just write that on the check? Don't spend it all on one war.
Boo! You stink!
Hey, do you want to know where I want my tax dollars? Back in my pocket. Stop fucking taxing us.
This isn't about going easy on extremists because they're white. The system already does that. This is about better utilizing the tools we already have, learning from our country's past mistakes, and preventing the most vulnerable from being further victimized. It's about seeing white supremacy as a question of security, but also education, media literacy, the internet, and most importantly, democracy. Because the right is openly calling a democratic election tyranny on top of years of grooming its base toward violence. And as long as the Republican Party sees a mob beating a police officer to death with an American flag and thinks, ooh, voters, then we will never be safe.
Well, isn't that something? She's basically telling us to educate ourselves and be scared. Oh, and a good example you set up with the guy beating someone up with a flag. You know what I would call that? A straw man. This whole thing about right-wing extremism is complete bullshit. This is pure propaganda, further pushing the narrative that white people are the most evil people in America, if not the world, and we need to stop them, be it silencing them on social media platform, or telling them to shut up when you're having a discussion with them out in public, or just flat out lock them up because assumptions.
What I'm trying to say is we might still need to launch Ted Cruz into space. This is ground control to Major Cruz. We do not miss your face.
I don't get it.